recording now, and I'm going to pass the presenter to you, Danielle.
Great. All right. Can we still hear me? We'll start there with Sean. Excellent. Okay. So just throughout, as Sean mentioned, he'll be monitoring the chat. So throughout the presentation, I welcome any of your questions about this, because especially if you're thinking it, probably someone else on the line is too. So I really do welcome any of your questions throughout this presentation. We will also have time at the end for more questions. But if you do have something throughout the presentation, especially as it pertains to what I'm talking about, I really encourage you to ask it, especially if the question would benefit many people on the line here. So I'll be focusing on social media for clubs and also for teams. And what we have here is a whole generalized approach, but shows you how you can use social media to your advantage. So a bit of the agenda, we'll talk about what social media is, social media platforms, and the best ones for curling specifically. We'll talk about identifying and connecting with your target audience, how to maximize social media for yourself, your organization, your team, controlling your brand, that's your organization's brand or your team's brand. We'll dive in a bit to paid social media ads and some studies that have already been done so far with regards to how paid ads have helped at the curling club level. I'll go into some of the social media tools and know that there's usually a limited budget, so focus on some of the free tools that are available currently on the market, as well as talk about the social media best practices. And of course, as I mentioned before, questions. So we'll kick off with what is social media. So it's a computer meditated tool that allows people and organizations to create, share, and exchange content. And that's just at the basic, most general level. Now, why is it so important in today's society? It's because people expect the information to come to them, and they rely heavily on the opinions of others to influence those decisions. So society is expecting an email to them, something to show up in their feed. They're not necessarily, people generally today are not necessarily going out to seek the information. So they're not necessarily checking a website every day for information or checking the newspaper every day for the information. So it's so important to use these tools that have the information come to them. And also rely heavily on the opinions of others. So think about how many times you'll go look at your Facebook feed, or you're looking to buy a new product or try a new service, or you often go to others to ask their opinion, and this comes into play on social media. So 75% of Canadians are using social media in some way, shape, or form, which is approximately 26 million people, which is a huge amount of people. Not to mention that 77% of Canadians own a smartphone, which is approximately 28 million.
Danielle?
Yes.
Can I just pause for a second?
Sure.
One of our participants is not getting any screen. Is that an issue other people are having, or is it just one of us? If you could type in the chat box. Just let me know. Actually, forget it. Hang on for a second. I'll unmute everybody. Okay, so most people are. It seems to be something. It's Dick. Okay, so I'm not sure what to tell you, Dick. It might be your internet connection.
Must be just me.
Yeah, unfortunately.
No, it's okay. Don't worry.
Keep going? Very good.
Oh, yeah. No, just continue on. Don't worry about it.
Okay, you're back, Danielle.
So when you think about that, that's such a huge demographic that you can reach, and it goes directly to them. I mean, the picture right now of the person basically shows what we look like in most of our lives. The information we're getting it first thing when we wake up and turn over and grab our phone, getting it when you're commuting into work, hopefully not while you're driving, but if you're taking the train or the bus, or waiting for them, you often pull out your phone in the grocery line, etc. So it's something that's it's a tool. Social media is a tool that is very accessible to the public, and it's right in their hands. So that's why it's so important to use. I do want to touch upon right at the beginning here how social media is different for personal and organizational use, and it's very important to distinguish that. So when you're on social media for your own personal page, you're talking as yourself. You can really say whatever you want, and any of the consequences that come with it are yours and yours alone. So but when you're speaking on behalf of an organization, it's very different because it's the organization or the team's voice and not yours. Though oftentimes it may sound a bit similar if you have only one person on the organization page. You tend to default to certain words or certain mannerisms, certain types of media. But it's important to keep in mind that you're representing the organization or team's views and not your personal ones. An example of how it could be used properly is making sure that you may believe in one thing. For instance, let's take the example we were talking about at the beginning there with the European broom scandal. You may believe that one team was in the right, one team is in the wrong, but your organization may be a case. We'll take Curling Canada, for example. They're not going to have a stand on that. So there would be no benefit to me as the manager of Curling Canada's organization to put out a post stating an opinion, because as Curling Canada, they don't have an opinion on that subject because it was out of their jurisdiction. And if there was an opinion put out, that would have some pretty radical, dire consequences of people, because it's butting in where you don't need. So there's an example of where you wouldn't necessarily want to do something, but where if you would want to do something, in that specific case, it would be the WCF. They needed to put a statement out there about what it was, and they not only put it on their website, but they directed people to that statement via their social media channels. So that's a case of where you may have to address it. So just a real life version of where are you addressing versus not. But that's a very important distinction here. More about social media in Canada. So approximately 75% of social media users are on Facebook as well as YouTube. Third most is Facebook Messenger, 50%, Instagram 37, and Twitter 31. I'll stop there for the next reason, that those are the most important social accounts in terms of curling. It truly is Facebook and YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. And this is simply because curling is a visual sport, and it's a sport in which there's lots of action, so you're able to share things that are video based. There's lots of great opportunity for visual, and all of these platforms lend themselves to it. So, example, Facebook is a great way to share information visually. You can do so many other fun things, and I apologize that this keeps switching before I'm ready. Apparently, it's on the timer. The Facebook is a great way to show not only visual, but also provide information with no restriction on the amount of information provided within a post, though we will talk about why you may not want to write a whole novel into a post. later. YouTube, of course, video sharing. It's one that's widely used amongst all age groups, and that's very important. Right from when they first start and pick up an iPad, anyone here with grandkids or kids of their own will know that they can pick it up and use it pretty easily, and YouTube is one of the popular apps that can be used right away. Twitter is a great up-to-the-minute feed, up to the second even, and you see that often being used at sporting events, and of course for curling. You'll, if you are a Twitter user right now, you'll see certain accounts that post up to the second updates, end by end updates. So it's a great way to convey things in the moment. It also can act like a newspaper headline where you put out a teasing headline and then link to a story. So that's been used widely as well. And then Instagram too is, over the past couple of years in the curling community, has really built its presence with not only organizations but also teams on there sharing their posts, but also their stories, a little bit more of a unique way. And then Facebook came along and it incorporated some stories ability into theirs. They're based on Instagram because they're tied together. So that's why those four are the most crucial ones, and the ones I suggest that you focus on. And maybe not necessarily all of them, but if you're going to pick and choose your time, those four would be the ones. So first, on social media, you have to identify your audience. So who is your target group? What's their age? Where are they located? Are they current curlers or curling fans, future curlers or curling fans? What do they value? What is their income? And are we looking at targeting sponsors and organizations? Now you have to identify age because it depends on what you're targeting. So if you're looking for a younger demographic, you might skew to a social media platform that skews younger. And if we're talking about, if we're putting Facebook skews a little bit older, and on the other end of the spectrum, you might have Instagram with Twitter in between. And as I mentioned earlier, YouTube is all ages. So if you're looking to target a younger group, or quite often you hear clubs talk about, let's target the 20 to 40-year-olds or 30 to 50-year-olds, you might want to look at those platforms that give you that best success rate. You also want to think about your location and how that might impact your audience and how you might go about with your plan. So, for instance, if you're in Ottawa, we'll take that where there's a large French-speaking population. Maybe you need to consider that some of your content might be based on that. So you might even have some French content in there. Are you targeting your current curlers or curling fans? So there's a certain lingo that us curlers have, and we know what it means to do a takeout or what a button means. But to future curlers or people who know very little about the sport, those terms wouldn't necessarily mean as much. So thinking about language in terms of identifying your audience. What do they value? So if they're a younger demographic, do they value family? Do they value free time? Do they have very little free time? What do they value? Also, their income. So are we dealing with an upper snack bracket, or are we dealing with a lower income group? And that might affect what kind of posts you put out there when you're talking about, we'll get into paid ads later, how that might affect it. And then also sponsors and organizations. Are you trying to catch the eye of a sponsor or organization? Are you trying to look professional on there? What is your goal there? So identifying who you're talking to first is crucial. Next one is connecting with your audience once you've identified them. And you have to ask the crucial questions, which are, what information do you want to convey? And more importantly, what's the best method of delivering that information to your audience? What do they want to see, and how will they view it? Are they an audience with a very short attention span? How can you provide this information to them without seeming like you're just constantly being an ad and throwing information in their face? Buy this, sign up here, do this, how can you connect with them? And then also thinking, how do they view it? Do they view your organization as they only put out posts when they want something from you, or are they actually trying to connect with you? And the biggest thing I can say is that be authentic. So be authentically the brand or the organization, the team, because people really respond to that. It's important to humanize and also throw a little humor into what you're doing. So social media is meant to be fun. It can be used for very serious purposes and have a lot of consequences, but it's also there to share information and as a fun platform. So being authentic and throwing a little humor in there every once in a while will honestly yield you some good results. So thoroughly encourage you to identify what it is and what it means to be authentically your brand or your team. Let's focus on how social media can help your team. So from a team perspective, you can, at the bare minimum, it's a great way to share information and results with family, friends, and fans. So you can, instead of coming off the ice and texting a whole list of people or sending out an email, it's one place where you can put it on there and it's all there and available to see. And it already went to that screen. I'll show you some examples of how that can be used and even tie into some sponsor branding, which is, it can allow you to promote your sponsors, especially if you're a curling team, you're coaching a team that isn't landing on Sportsnet every other weekend or on TSN for various championships. There's not as much opportunity for exposure. So social media is another way that you can highlight your sponsors. And I'll show in a moment a great way Team Epping has done it. It also allows you to keep in contact with your teammates or coaches. And what I mean by this, and you saw it in the previous slide, how Facebook Messenger, so many people have it. And one of the biggest things today is trying to connect with your team. I know as coaches, you're all talking about communication and finding the right tool for it. So making sure that social media is one of the ways you can connect. So if everyone doesn't have an iPhone and you can't have a group chat, another alternative could be WhatsApp, or it could be Facebook Messenger, could be Instagram Messenger, because there are some things that you may just want a quick conversation about that even doesn't even lend itself necessarily to an email. So using social media for that to figure out what platform works best, especially if you're coaching a younger team, because they're so used to using social media in their daily lives for the most part. And then just keeping in touch with the curling world in general. It's pretty important that you know what's going on in the greater curling world and can anticipate what's going on. If, for instance, if Curlon is putting on a competition, or the OCC, as you saw here, there are posts on social media about that. So just knowing what's going on in the greater curling world and being able to respond. These are just post examples. So as mentioned, I pulled a post from Team Epping, and it's a great post. They have a great social media feed. You can tell, especially this year, they're very branded. They've got their colors on here, and they're telling their fans what's going on. So it's an example of that. However, they also are able to sneak in their sponsor, Cutter and Buck, down at the bottom. You'll notice in their post they feature a different one every tournament, or maybe every couple games. And it's a great way for them to organically incorporate their sponsorship and keep in touch with fans in an aesthetically pleasing way. And especially the top teams now have gone to more professional looking social media posts, because truly it is so important in this day and age. And that's what sponsors are wanting to see. They're focused on digital media. So that's why it's become so crucial, especially at the top, when there are deals of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands that they're working with. So you see that. And on the flip side, I did include a little snapshot of our team's post where we use this post to acknowledge the sponsors. We call it our hashtag Sponsor Sunday series, where each Sunday we would acknowledge one of our sponsors. And it is a smaller thing. Of course, we don't have the reach that Team Epping does, but it's something that you can do. I suspect for many of the teams you're coaching, unless they're one of those top teams in the Slam, any little bit of exposure can be helpful. You'll notice that we even tagged Dixie Curling Club in there. That was important for Chris because he actually works out of the Dixie Curling Club, and if we're tagging them in there, they can recognize that and perhaps repost. So the post goes further than just our account. So those are two examples of how social media could be used to your advantage. I'm going to flip over into how can social media help my club. So for one, it can share your club's story, and that's a big thing. To be able to welcome people into your club, you need to be able to share what it's all about. And here's an example where the Royal Canadian Curling Club in Toronto was celebrating 90 years of curling. Amazing, and especially in the case of curling being so history focused, and people really respond to the historical aspect. Sharing that makes people feel part of it. Also, by simply sharing information with club members. So in this case, it's the Navy Club was mentioning that all games tonight will run as scheduled, beginning with evening men's draw. It can help you put out that kind of information that's more in the moment. We all know snowstorms play a big role in how the ability for clubs to function. Perhaps the club loses power, the generator goes down, whatever it may be. It's an opportunity to share with your club in live time and put it out there. Now, it's usually accompanied by multiple channels, so something on their website, an email going out to the members, and also social media. But again, the great thing about social media is that people, it's a way you share it. So, for instance, if I was a member of the Navy Club and I see that, well, then I might retweet that and say, hey, members, if there's a bunch of people on there who I might know might need this, check this out. We are back on for curling. So that's the great thing about social media. It gives you that ability to get a greater reach than just your immediate one. You can also recruit potential new members. Pulled a post from the KW Granite advertising their summer league registration, talking about competitive league and popular league. It's a great tool, especially when I'll talk about the paid social media. But putting this out here, it's a free way to recruit members and to put it out there, and essentially being very welcoming to new people and saying, come on in. So that's another great tool that you can use to help your club. Also, you can promote events such as Bonspiels and Learn to Curls. I've got the example from the Ottawa Curling Club here, talking about an Ottawa Rito Challenge. Putting out that information to the world. And again, it will often be accompanied by a post to a website or to also through an email blast, maybe even a sign-up sheet at the club. But this, again, comes directly to people, and they can share it and help spread the word. So essentially, I won't say it's them doing the work for you, but it does help get the word out more, especially when you're budget strapped. Again, if you've gotten nothing out of the past things, just know that it's a great free method to really get your messaging out. Okay, I've talked a little bit about this, but where does social media fit into the big picture? It works well with clubs that most clubs have websites, even some news section, a blog on their site, and put out emails and e-blasts to people. Well, the great thing that social media does and connects these all is that it helps promote what you want your members or your potential members or whoever your audience is to see. So if you're talking about maybe you want to drive traffic to a particular area on your website, for instance, want to drive traffic to the sign up for this webinar. We'll put it out on social media, and then it will with a link of where to register, and people can simply click there. you're talking about blogs, you don't necessarily want to put a huge amount of text into any of the posts that you're putting on. People have a very short attention span and often finish reading after 1 or 2 sentences. Therefore, it's crucial to keep them short and then redirect them over to where more information is available if they so choose to look at it. And also, it's a great tool to drive people onto your e-blast list for emails. So if you're looking to recruit more people or get that word out via email as well, you can send a link through to registering for an e-blast list. So really, it often, they all marry well together in terms of getting the communication out to your members or potential members. So in order to maximize social media, you have to first assess the available resources, then build a plan, and then execute that plan. So when you assess the available resources, you first have to think who will run the accounts. And this is a big one here because you're wanting to figure out someone who has some knowledge of social media, also understands how to use it as a brand, and can have the time to devote to the account. And are they someone who will be able to follow along with the branding and have time to do it? So whether that's, quite often it ends up being a club manager, or sometimes it's a great club volunteer or board member. If you're talking from a team perspective, is it a teammate? Is it a coach? Is it a parent who runs the account? Sometimes it can be great that it's not a teammate running the account simply because if you get too focused on social media and live and die and on what's being said online, and especially if there aren't always the most positive things being said, it can really affect an athlete's performance. So sometimes that's best when it's a coach or even a parent outside of the team doing it. Plus, social media can be deceivingly difficult to do and time consuming. They just think, oh, it's just a matter of throwing up a post, throwing up some words, throwing up a picture, but really there's a lot more to it, especially if you're trying to hit certain goals and targets. So it can be time consuming and distracting. So that's where it's important to identify a person who not only has the knowledge, but also has the time to devote to the account. The other thing in terms of available resources is assessing if there is a budget to use. Are you able to do any sort of paid ads or marketing? And maybe it is a case of going to speaking with the club manager, recognizing that if there is a marketing budget, looking at allocating more of that budget over to the social media side, because there are some great benefits to that. Next, you want to build a plan. So I mentioned earlier, you want to set some goals. What is your goal for the account? Is your goal to attract sponsors? Is your goal to attract new club members? Is your goal to be a resource for existing club members? So you've got to establish what your goal is, because that drives everything else. And not unlike how coaches speak to their teammates and try to get their players to establish those goals, you also want to make them smart. You also need to establish roles and responsibilities, and especially when there's multiple people managing an account, you want to make sure who's going to do what when, or who's going to be responding to things, when are they going to be responding. That's pretty important to know, so that people have an expectation of what it is that you're doing. And maybe it's, if you're on a team, maybe one person manages Instagram, one person does Twitter, one person does Facebook, or whatever it may be. Also look into building an actual plan and a posting schedule. Now, this could be as detailed or as loosey-goosey as you like. I mean, the more detail you can do, the better, and the better chance at success for meeting your goals. But even having a general outline of this week or this month, we're going to focus on recruiting people to our Learn to Curl. So that will be dedicated in August, September. And then in November, we're really going to focus on talking about our events that are going on at the club, whatever it may be. The more detailed you can put together for a schedule, the better. And then, of course, establish that budget or lack of budget in the case of many clubs, but recognizing what you do have, what resources are available, and who is responsible for what. Once you have that plan, you have to execute it. The biggest thing is being engaging. Social media is all about being social. So it's not just about blasting out one-way messages. It's about also talking to other people online. And you want to be consistent with that. And so that people come to expect that you'll be talking to them through that tool. And you don't want to stop, because once you stop that conversation, you end it for everyone involved there, and you want people to continue talking and engaging with your brand. So if you stop unexpectedly, people won't keep engaging with you, which is, of course, the goal, to make sure that people are. And then always reassess your priorities and analyze your results. So at the end of the day, are you achieving what you wanted to? After a season, did you achieve what you wanted to? Maybe you need to reassess that on a monthly basis. Whatever your goals are, you need to figure out that you are meeting them. And if you're not, how can you change that? And looking at the analytics can be a great way to figure out if what you're doing is in fact hitting what you're wanting to, demographics, number of posts, etc. You also need to consider about controlling your brand. And I alluded to this before when we talked about your personal voice versus your voice for your organization or team. You want to make sure that it aligns with the values and mission statement for your team or organization. That's very important, because if something is off brand or makes you hesitate, why would they say that? Then it can turn off potential members or members themselves, or potential sponsors for a team. So you have to be very careful about what you're saying and how you're saying it. You also want to make sure that you have a consistent voice. So thinking of the organization as one entity, one person, if you will. What is their voice? How do they say it? Are they fun? Are they happy? Are they serious? Or what is their voice? And use that throughout. So whether you notice that people have certain patterns of how they speak and how they write, but you want to try to keep that as consistent as possible between two or more people. And that can be difficult and often involves some conversation, but just making sure that you are coming from that voice of the curling club. I often like to say, when you put out posts, it's not an I, it's we. We are inviting you to our bond spiel. Let's talk about paid ads. The great thing about paid ads is that you can hit new audiences with them. You can target so many different facets of the population using keywords, age, location, gender, activities. And truly, it's a fairly minimal cost, actually, when you look at the grand scheme of things, especially if your club already has a marketing budget. So it can be pretty small. And so to show you what I mean, we've got Curling Canada did a pilot project, and they did it with 3 clubs across Canada. They did a series of paid Facebook ads, and it was advertising, as you can see on the right here. Here's one where they're advertising free curling, a Learn to Curl event, and they were paid, and they happened to use, again, that humor. They brought Homer Simpson in there, someone who's really recognizable to the public. He's not exactly curling specific, but he happens to be talking about curling in here. So they used the paid Facebook ads and attracted 253 attendees across the 3 clubs, 64 of which are now curling members, which is approximately a 25% conversion rate. And the cost was about $17 per conversion. So in the big grand scheme of things, that was actually pretty impressive just with Facebook ads alone. So and they live on forever too. I mean, there is a period of time in which you're most likely to see them. However, things on the internet, as we like to say, stay on the internet. Whereas you can take something like a newspaper, often has a very short shelf life. So if you're looking at throwing some ad dollars somewhere, I highly suggest looking into paid ads. So some social media tools that you can use. As I mentioned, you can use some free ones, since I know most clubs and teams don't come with a large budget. And the first one is for managing and monitoring. Often in-app ones are there. So what I mean by that is that Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, they all come with in-app ability to post and analyze even in Facebook, I believe even YouTube now has the ability to schedule some posts. Then you also have tools such as Hootsuite, which allows you to manage social profiles all in one place, again, free. TweetDeck, which allows you to follow Twitter accounts and hashtags all in one place. Sumall is an analytics manager. And I did put down at the bottom here Sprout Social, which is a paid app, but it's a fantastic one that allows you to link accounts and multiple users. So especially if you have multiple people working on the account, it's a great way to integrate the tasks. You can manage, monitor, and use the analytics there. And again, encourage you to look at the analytics to see what you're doing and whether you're meeting your goals. And again, most of that can be done in-app across all the platforms. A couple of free photo editing apps that are great to use, especially because all of these social media platforms, as we'll talk about in a moment, are all very visual. So Canva is a great one that it has a bunch of fantastic, very free types of editing tools. So you can not only edit photos, you can create cards, you can create Instagram stories. It's great what it can do. Snapseed is a great, easy photo editing tool that can be downloaded straight to a phone. And Pick Collage is a way to throw multiple pictures up and make a quick collage. So those are just a couple examples of the free tools out there. There are many more, but those are a couple of my personal favorites. I'll focus on some social media best practices. So in some general ones, you want to set a goal and have a strategy to achieve that goal. I mean, you've got to be able to answer the question, why are we doing this in the first place? Would also mention that you want to think about quality over quantity here. So what I mean is the types of posts. You'd rather have a few good posts rather than just a couple hurried together, thrown out there posts, because that makes a greater impact on the audience. Consistency truly is key when you're talking about posting on social media. So people need to know that you're going to be posting and that it's an account that you can follow for updated news. But if you maybe only post once a month or once every couple weeks, people aren't going to really pay attention as much. Also, you should really, as much as possible, try to use the correct image sizes. So each platform, when you're putting out an image, has a slightly different dimension for how it displays on their platform. And you can just do a quick Google search of Twitter image size and it will pop up what you need, Facebook image size, etc. And this one is a tricky one and one of the hardest ones to master, but once you do, it can really make a big impact. And it leans more towards the PR side of things, but handle negativity with grace. And that's with social media can be such a wonderful tool, but as you're probably all aware, it can also go toxic very easily too. But if you can handle that negativity, you can turn it back into a positive conversation quite easily. And it can be tough too, especially when we talk about these not being your personal accounts, but when you invest so much time and energy into it, sometimes when a negative piece of information comes across, it can be hard not to take that personally. But just remembering not to take it as personally and then responding in a way that that turns the conversation positively is something that's very key. Also, you want to, I've talked about this before, but engage your audience. Draw them in, bring them into a conversation, get them to keep the conversation going with you too. You also want to think about posting at optimal times. So it depends on the platform, but for instance, Twitter, that's up to the second, and people look at their feeds basically in chronological order. You wouldn't want to post at 3 a.m. Eastern time, because most of the country is asleep at that point. So that's not necessarily when you'd want to post. However, if you post it in the middle of the day, or say during one of the big championship events when you know curlers will be up and most likely on their devices, then that could be a better example of a time to post. Also, be on there and see what other competitors and clubs are doing. There's some great ideas out there, and I say competitors, talking from a team reference, team to team, but we're curling in general. We're all trying to support each other, get more people into the sport. So it is pretty important to look at what others are doing and share those ideas. Couple best practices for Facebook. You want to complete your profile, so the About section as much as you can on there so that people can go on there. It basically sometimes acts as a website for people so that they get a snippet of what your business is about or your team is about. And you always want to use visuals, always, photos and videos, because that's what grabs people's attention. People are scrolling through feeds. If they don't see something that catches their eye, they'll just scroll right past it. On Facebook, you want to limit the hashtags that you use, because those are more for other platforms, and you want to really look at eliminating those and using them on other platforms, unless, of course, they make sense to use it. And I do recognize I had one in one of my team's posts, but that was our official name of what we called the day. Therefore, it made sense. But other than that, more hashtags in there just makes people want to tune out. So limiting them, keeping it concise. Again, you're not trying to write a novel on there. You're just trying to grab their attention in 1 to 2 sentences. You want to also respond to comments and messages within a reasonable amount of time and keep consistent with that. So a reasonable amount of time will depend on your team and depend on your business. Maybe that's an hour, maybe that's a day. But social media is very quick, so in order to keep interest, you do want to respond consistently and within a reasonable amount of time. Now, Instagram, you want to use a more compelling artistic visual for this one. This is where you really want something eye-catching, because that's really the basis of Instagram. You want to use hashtags, but not too many. I believe Instagram limits you to about 30, but you can also, and they're great because they're searchable and a great way for people to see them. But you also want to be careful not to turn your audience off by too many hashtags. And tagging the photos whenever possible, whether it's your sponsors, teammates, your people at the club, great way to engage people. You also want to keep it concise in your caption. And then, of course, responding to the comments and messages within a reasonable amount of time. Twitter, you'll, again, always use visuals because you have the option not to. Photos and videos, again, to capture the attention of the audience as they're scrolling through that feed. Use hashtags, but not too many. Especially, Twitter is one of the original places for the hashtag, but you want to make sure that there are too many down there so that people are completely tuning them out. But a couple really well-placed relevant ones can be quite impactful. It also gives you the ability to tag photos, not videos, but photos. So I would encourage you to do that whenever possible. And then, again, you'll notice a theme here. Responding to comments and messages is within a reasonable amount of time. Now, this reasonable amount of time for Twitter versus Facebook may be different because Twitter is so up to the second that responding quickly may be more of a priority on Twitter. And then YouTube, we have, if you are planning on using that, a couple things to keep in mind is that you want to create a catchy title for whatever video you're using. make sure that you have a thorough description, as well as an attention-grabbing thumbnail, because that's what people see when they're, again, scrolling through a feed. And then you can use the tags on there to maximize the reach. So there's an area where you can put in some keywords. It's important to have that there because that optimizes your searchability when someone goes to search for something in YouTube. I have come to the end of this presentation, but I do welcome any of your questions. So I'd love to open the floor at this time.
Okay, I will open up the mics if that's all right with you, Danielle.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's open mic.
Hi, Danielle. It's Sabina Islam. I have a couple questions.
Sure.
Sometimes, so it's for a team social media. A lot of times between events, the team takes care of it, but during the event, I try to take care of it. So like you said, they're focusing on performing.
Yeah.
Tagging on Facebook seems to be very problematic sometimes. So, when you tag, say, a sponsor on Facebook, especially if we already follow them, I would assume that when you start typing in their name, that would show up. That doesn't always happen. Do you have any tips on that? How to
Sure, and it doesn't always happen, of course, especially if it's when you're talking about a team account and then trying to input, if it's just someone's name, like a personal account, it doesn't always work. But then if you're talking about an actual organization, sometimes when I've had trouble on a mobile device, what I'll do is I'll post it with the name, but then I'll go back in once I get to my laptop and edit it using the computer. Sometimes it just ends up you're more easily able to find the name. So I would suggest that.
Okay, so try on the computer after. And then thank you. The Hootsuite that you were talking about. So like right now, if you go on Instagram and do a post, you can carry that post over to Facebook as well. So is this sort of a similar thing where you basically do a post for one platform and it carries them into all the platforms?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just wondering, because when you were talking about the picture sizes and stuff, does it convert the picture sizes on its own? Does it carry over all the tags properly?
Right, and that's where I suggest that when you have time, because it doesn't actually convert on its own, that you actually, there are tools and within the apps too, you can, especially like Instagram to Facebook or Twitter, you can do that, absolutely. Though because it doesn't convert the pictures, and as sort of talked about, the use of hashtags in Twitter, but not necessarily Facebook and whatnot, because it doesn't convert like that, I strongly encourage posting to each individual platform. I mean, quite often it's, my favorite button is the copy paste one, where you can copy the original message and then just paste it into the next platform, modify it a little, maybe throw in a hashtag or two, and then go from there. But quite often, that's, I mean, for ease of timing, by all means, you can link them, but I strongly encourage not doing that, only because the platforms are different. But if you're in the case of a team where you're, in your case, I would say linking them can be helpful to save time. So it all depends on what your goals are.
Okay, thank you. One more question. This may sound silly, but when you're on a winning streak, the posts are great, and it's easy to come up with something to say. If they aren't having a good weekend, any tips on how to creatively post about their weekend? Because sometimes it's just radio silence, and they're like, "Don't post anything. We're not playing."
Yeah. Been there. Humor. Humor. Start taking a positive spin on things, or using a humorous approach to things. Because also, even if it's, because those are definitely the times when teammates are less likely to do it. But if they're seeing sort of that positivity from their supporters and their social media account, like saying, "Oh, this wasn't our weekend, but we learned that you can't give up threes every time in the first end," or something like that. Like finding a way to put a positive spin on this, or we have lots of season left to go, or we're just waiting to peak at the right time, or throw something in there that shows the humorous side and that spins it in a positive light, I would say. And it can be very difficult to do, especially if you're on a long non-winning streak. Then it can be difficult. But I encourage you to use humor and find the positive wherever you can.
Okay, thank you. But not sound too much like a mom so they don't get upset.
Yeah. There's a delicate balancing act.
There is. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Danielle, there was a question in the chat. What are your thoughts on teams live streaming their games on social media? Maybe you can talk about that a little bit. I
think that's a great idea. I think it's a fantastic way to connect with the fans back there. I mean, a lot of these events don't have the ability to do live streaming on their own, simply because there isn't the budget to do it. So I think it's a fantastic way to get that out there and for fans back at home to see. So as long as it doesn't conflict with any existing broadcast contracts, it's a great idea. But for instance, you can't do that when Sportsnet or TSN are on the air. So, but I assume that this is probably mostly happening for teams that aren't on Sportsnet and TSN. So therefore, great idea.
Does that not have a bearing on what the age group is of the opposition?
Well, that's a good question, and you should definitely ask before you do it, so that teams aren't caught off guard, especially when it comes to a younger age group. But if you're talking an older age group, generally that's fine. I guess as a courtesy, it's always great to ask first, but for the younger age group, would definitely ask before doing anything.
Well, I found in a U18 challenge round last year, I wasn't asked, and when I saw it happening, one of the parents pointed out, I questioned and called about the rules and was told it had to be accepted by the team. The other team was upset when we declined to be posted on social media.
Mm-hmm. And it can be a tricky situation because live streaming can be good not only just for teams and family back at home, but also used as a coaching tool. So that's where you have to be cautious, and it depends on the event too and what you signed up for. I understand some have more stringent rules than others, but you take, for instance, an OCA playdown, curl-on playdown, and by signing up, you're waiving your rights to worry about photography and videos, etc. Therefore, that has a built-in clause.
Only from the OCA, not from everybody and their fans to post it on social media. So what you're signing is only related to the OCA.
Yeah. I would suggest just because we could go down a big rabbit hole here, but just asking the other team first as a courtesy should be something that's adhered to.
Are there any other questions, folks? I'm hearing a repeating beep, so I don't know whether that's a positive or a negative or... All right, folks. Well, if there's no other questions, I just want to take the opportunity to thank you, Danielle, for the presentation. And I hope you all enjoyed it, and I hope you got a lot of information out of it. So thank you for your attendance.
Thank you all, and have a good night, and happy holidays.
Thank you.